Today, we're seeing anti-Semitism across the entire political spectrum. It's an age-old hatred that has been inflamed by the attacks on October 7th. But what we're seeing now is a frightening new trend that has dangerous implications that reach far beyond the Jewish community. Anti-Semitism is being weaponized to undermine our democratic freedoms and institutions under the guise of protecting Jews, when in fact it only intensifies the extreme hatred and exclusion of Jews and puts them in danger. It also puts the very democratic freedoms that we cherish in danger, like freedom of speech and self-expression. Let's take a look at the crucial intersection of anti-Semitism and democracy, and how we can all play a role in combating anti-Semitism when we spot it, in this episode of Your Voice Matters. Jonathan, Jacoby, thanks for joining us. First, for our audience that is unfamiliar, what's the Nexus Project and what do you do there?
The Nexus Project is a Jewish organization that works to fight anti-Semitism and counter the assault on democracy. Unfortunately, what we see right now is anti-Semitism or concerns about anti-Semitism being weaponized in a way that are being used to undermine democratic institutions and freedom of speech and freedom of expression.
Give me an example.
Well, for example, when a student who wrote an op-ed criticizing Israeli policy or criticizing American policy regarding Israel is kidnapped and put in jail without any due process, that's a perfect example of alleged anti-Semitism being used as a pretext for cracking down on immigration in this case.
So how do you solve for that? If you wanted to protect Jewish people, Jewish students, etc., on campuses, by taking someone's freedom of speech away, I'm imagining that there's a backlash that would come onto all people who support Jewish students and perhaps Israel, right?
Well, I think there's a couple of ways in which there's a backlash. First of all, I suppose that when Jewish concerns are being used as a pretext for denying people their very rights, then Jews get blamed. And that's a classic anti-Semitic methodology, so to speak, right? To try to put Jews in the middle. So that doesn't work for Jews, for sure. Also, I think, there's nothing that's been more important for American Jews than our democracy. Nothing has kept us safe. Nothing has kept us prosperous. And the idea that by undermining democracy, you can somehow protect Jews is an absurdity, and it's actually dangerous.
You published a paper recently with a bunch of leading scholars. It was literally titled Fighting Anti-Semitism, Protecting Democracy, a Strategy for the Trump Era. Give me kind of the highlights, the top level here. What would be part of this strategy?
Well, the strategy includes a number of components. One of them is protecting Jews, right? Our synagogues should be safe. Our public spaces, we should be able to walk on a campus and not be assaulted because we're wearing a yarmulke or something like that. That's the first. The second is we have to be able to build coalitions with other minorities, with vulnerable communities. Those coalitions strengthen our safety. Freedom of expression, academic freedom, those are very integral elements of Jewish safety. Working for immigration that makes this country such a great country is actually a good thing for Jews, not a bad thing for Jews.
You say in the report, the president and members of his administration regularly promote anti-Semitic conspiracies and use, elevate, and normalize anti-Semitic rhetoric. How, on the one hand, the president puts out statements saying, hey, look, and his representatives say that we are for the defense of the Jewish people, for the defense of Israel. And then on the other hand, organizations like yours point out in evidence that there is this kind of trafficking in anti-Semitic tropes and ideologies from the far right, where the concern has, at least for the last couple of decades, been that this is something that's only trafficked on the far left.
First of all, I think that this juxtaposition of the left and the right is just it's wrong. Right? There is anti-Semitism on the left.
Hmm.
Some of it, much of it, comes out of the Israel-Palestine conflict. It's a problem and it should be addressed. It's very different than neo-Nazism. It's very different than when a man gets up on the podium at an inaugural celebration and raises his hand in a Nazi-like salute.
I think, one of the core questions that a lot of people have is in how the broad brush of anti-Semitism is being used to really color all kinds of dissent. Yeah, help our audience understand. Like, can you be critical of the Israeli state without being anti-Semitic?
You can be critical of what Israel is doing. You can be critical of the ideology that underlies Israel. What you can't do is you can't deny Jews the same rights you give to others. You can't say, well, we don't think there should be a state of Israel, but yes, there should be a state of Palestine. Then you've crossed the line into anti-Semitism.
What are the kind of simplest ways where you can help spot what is something anti-Semitic versus what is just critical speech?
Well, there are three things that will tell you if it's anti-Semitic. One is it uses anti-Semitic tropes or myths, right? If it says, oh, this is part of a worldwide Zionist conspiracy to kill babies or something like that, or to control the banks. One is if it brings harm to Jews. So if a student is walking on campus and he gets hit on the head because he's wearing a yarmulke, that's anti-Semitic. And one is anti-Semitic if it denies rights to Jews that are afforded to other people because they're Jews. I would add one more, which is that if you associate what Jews do with Israel and you say, because Israel's doing this, then you are responsible as a Jew. That's also anti-Semitic.
How do you help, I guess, people understand that nuance in seeing a citizen, seeing a person who's holding a view versus somebody who is, you know, carrying a flag for a political party and purpose and trying to accomplish an ideological mission?
Well, I actually think in that case, there's no nuance. It's pretty clear, right?
Yeah.
If you're expressing a political point of view, it's a political point of view. If it's hard for you sometimes to hear that political point of view, then maybe it's time to listen, but it's not time to toxify the conversation by making accusations of anti Semitism or any other form of racism.
Is there a concern? Do you have a concern about, I guess, the slippery slope here that under the guise of protecting campuses from anti Semitism, that the chilling effect on free speech will be more significant and might change the discussions on campus about lots of things?
I think that you're absolutely right. And I think that's one of the objectives of the crackdown on what is called anti Semitism is really a crackdown on academic freedom and on the university itself and on the institutions of higher education that have been at the foundation of our open society. And I think that's part of the strategy.
Jonathan Jacoby from the Nexus Project. Thanks so much for joining us.
You're very welcome. Thank you.